Hello, and welcome to my audio commentary of One Piece Sanji. This is the 6th volume of the Jump Character Remix series that follows a character's journey throughout the Sea of Survival Super Rookie Saga. In other words, that's before the time skip. Just to preface, this is not my first reading of the canon, as I am caught up to the latest chapter of the manga, so there will probably be spoilers up to, if not even beyond, the Wano Country Saga. I also don't recommend this book as a foray into One Piece due to its fragmented and condensed nature. With that said, let's get right into it. This book starts story-wise with Germa, which, story time, when the Jump Character Remix series was first released, or rather announced, I was under the impression that we would get this, that we would have Sanji's story starting from his childhood at Germa. But once Luffy's volumes came out, I somehow convinced myself that the books would cover only the Super Rookie Saga, and that Sanji's volume would begin with the Orbit. So imagine my shock when the backs of Zoro and Nami's books previewed a panel of young Sanji in an iron mask saying, "I want to be a cook." I was shaking in my boots. I could not believe there was this massive New World spoiler in an advertisement for a Paradise book. But now that I know better, I'm glad we get to start with Germa. So Germa, one thing I'll always come back to is the fact that Sanji refers to himself as a believer on Punk Hazard when he's arguing with Zoro. This is an intrinsic part of him that's prevailed all throughout his life. Even as a child, despite his poor performance among his siblings, we see that he keeps trying. There's never resistance to the training he receives. In fact, when he's mock fighting with Niji, he gets in the preemptive strike. He attacks first, and he fails. No matter how much he struggles, he always gets back up and tries again. Because there's this belief that so long as he tries hard, he will become better. It's the carrot Judge dangles over him by stressing that Sanji will only earn his rightful place in the kingdom if he works 100 times harder than his siblings. Speaking of, I really like the scene where Sanji feeds the rat, not because of the compassion it shows, but because of his excitement in seeing it eat his food. Sanji starts off the scene seated at a distance reading books, but the moment the rat begins eating, he rushes up to it and asks if the food is delicious. He comes on so strongly that the rat looks shocked by his sudden approach, and I think it speaks for Sanji's resilience and the strength of his heart that he's able to see the world in such a bright light, that he can find reasons to smile so joyously for all the wounds, emotional and physical, he carries on the daily. Sanji as a child is very pure in his motives and thoughts, which works both for and against him. But what Judge says here about Sanji being talentless is pretty false. By his standards, Sanji is a failure as a warrior. Objectively speaking, though, I think Niji and Sanji are probably the two most talented sons of the Vinsmoke family. By the time he's 19, Sanji is a formidable fighter despite his primary designation as the Straw Hat's cook. He's also the best swimmer on the crew before Jinbei joins, and he excels at juggling multiple variables and managing the flow of an operation at a given moment. Most of all, he's a very hard worker, and his sense of smell is nothing short of extraordinary. Of course, none of that potential matters to a scientist who wants results foremost. Sanji gets thrown into a cell in the castle's basement, and I have to say that Otani Ikue did a phenomenal job of voicing Sanji in the scene. It's utterly heartrending because we see how much Sanji has internalized his failures despite his best efforts. At this point in his life, he has no idea what Sora has sacrificed for him. He only knows what he's seen for himself, and it's that he's always falling short and incurring his father and his brother's wrath because of it. In this moment, his bruised heart truly believes that his was a defective birth, that he was born wrong, and this severely damages his self-image for years to come. Fast forward to 6 months later, does the basement cell have a bed? It's not there even when the furniture falls on the bars during Germa's commute over the Red Line. He gets a toilet and a dresser, but not a bed. It's kind of rude. Anyway, this flashback with Sora is where we see a pattern in Sanji's behavior with how often he apologizes in Germa for things that are beyond his control. His family has drilled into his head that his misfortune is his fault, and this results in an inordinate amount of shame when he brings the spoiled meat to his mother. The food got crushed and wet on the way. He lists everything that went wrong and hides his face in his hood, making no mention of the unforgiving weather or the dog that attacked him. It's as if he's already accepted the fact that it was his fault for failing to keep the dog at bay. So we see that Sanji is a child without confidence. Sora knows this, and when she compliments his food and asks him to keep cooking, she gives her son, who has never known success, hope. This memory of her serves as a ray of salvation in the despairing darkness of his basement prison, which completely recontextualizes what it means for Sanji to look for the All Blue. I wrote a short essay on this topic on my WordPress, which I'll link for anyone who's interested, even though it's a bit messy. In any case, learning about the All Blue is what kickstarts Sanji's drive to escape Germa, and that's what makes his dream so meaningful. This is a dream of freedom, to give himself the allowance to become something more than the failure by confiding in Reiju that he wants to be a cook. It's a terrifying, upsetting undertaking that chooses to abandon his attachment to his father and everything he's ever known in favor of his mother's love. And that's what makes Sora's sacrifice so powerful, because Sora's love is what ultimately frees Sanji from the shackles of his father's hatred. But here's the thing. Sanji is a believer. 13 years later, he holds onto the hope that his biological family has improved as people. At the tender age of 8, a no small part of him still believes that Judge, after so many years of doling out abuse, must have some love for him. When this is proven false, the final dregs of Sanji's self-worth shatter, and Vinsmoke Sanji dies shortly thereafter at sea, unwanted and wordless. Sanji continues to be a believer where others are concerned, but he fails to extend that belief to himself going forward. Trying didn't change anything. Trying didn't make him wanted. He'll later learn that it'll make him useful, but no more than that. Only after his reconciliation with Luffy on Whole Cake Island does he truly begin to recover from the deep damage Judge has inflicted with a single request. This scene devastates me every time, because it's not within Sanji's heart to hate. He only desires to love, and he's only ever punished for it. So Sanji runs, and Reiju's parting message to Sanji is the reason why I love the dynamic between Robin and Sanji. In terms of what they need individually, they're a perfect match. They heal each other in ways they'd be hard-pressed to find elsewhere, and they do it so naturally through these really subtle gestures that are so beautiful to me. And with this, Sanji escapes Germa and boards the orbit. I will talk more about Robin later. And convenient as this ordering is, I'm glad Sanji's childhood was revealed so late in the actual narrative of One Piece. While the Straw Hats as a whole don't care to pry, Sanji voices an active interest in knowing Nami's past from Nojiko, yet avoids discussing his own. This contrast adds a layer of distance to a character who clearly likes to be close to people, and that makes the full reveal all the more shocking. And now, 2 years later, Sanji debuts as a dreamer on the orbit. Although he finds himself at odds with his realistic peers, his easygoing smile and expressive language speak for how much being with the orbit's crew has done for him. Even the captain addresses him by name, and one of the cooks holds him by the shoulder in a gesture that can be construed as protective when Zeph's crew attacks. There's care here, and I think everyone here doesn't get as much credit as they deserve, including Sanji. It's easy to link the discriminatory behavior of today's Sanji toward men to his rotten childhood, but the reality is that he's put his past behind him because that was what Judge wanted. It doesn't mean he's unaffected by what happened to him, but Vinsmoke Sanji died a long time ago as far as he's concerned. The resentment and fear of a dead prince have no place here. Sanji is also conscientious by nature, so he doesn't hold his previous treatment at the hands of men against other men. If anything, I would argue that the only thing Sanji brought with him aboard the orbit was love gifted to him by his mother and his sister, which is part of the reason why he's much more emotionally open around women. His preferential treatment therefore stems not from hatred, but affection. But while the orbit's crew have done their part to nurture a boy as young as Sanji, he still considers his existence a lonesome one as the only dreamer aboard. The cooks are kind to him, but they also ridicule the dream that means everything to him. The All Blue may not exist, but Sanji doesn't care. He chooses to believe instead, and if it means fighting to the near death for it on his own, then so be it. It's once that dream threatens to crumble at Zeph's leg that he begins to tear up from the verge of losing everything. And then he ends up on the rock. I feel like Sanji suffers from a reverse monkey's paw, where good things happen to him in the worst ways possible. And here's an interesting tick of Sanji's after he confronts Zeph about the disproportionate allotment of food. He's frustrated to tears and becomes speechless. He's basically quaking from how furious he is. Sanji does this a lot as an adult. Whenever he's overwhelmed, be it from anger or distress, he huffs and puffs as if his body can hardly contain the intensity of his emotions, and he has to take a moment to gather his words. He can't release everything he feels, and that's why I think for similar reasons he pulls on his hair when he's at the height of distress. At the end of the day, Sanji resolves to live by himself and leave Zeph to die out of spite. He speaks thoughtlessly in his anger, and I think that stays with him over the years in the form of his empathetic outbursts. Sanji gets a lot of flack for the terrible thing he says to Jinbei on Fishman Island, which is totally valid, but it makes sense for him to say things like that in the heat of the moment. Putting aside this instance with Zeph, which is something of an outlier, he always expresses more anger on someone else's behalf. Chronologically speaking, his fight with Yonji over the turtle is the earliest example of this. His fit of temper toward Jinbei later down the road stems from his love for Nami, who suffered terribly at Arlong's hands. And to his credit, he quickly lets it go when she makes her stance clear. Anyway, the reason his grudge towards Zeph deviates from the norm is because he's now accustomed to being a loner, which makes screaming for help at a passing ship during a storm something of a double-edged blade, because he's thrust back into a position of helplessness where his pleas go unheard, just as they'd gone unnoticed in Germa. That's what makes Zeph's sacrifice so incredible, because Sanji didn't ask, and Zeph gave his leg anyway. And the revelation of this breaks Sanji, who immediately thinks of how Zeph can no longer be a pirate. His empathy runs deep, and the weight of what he's taken from Zeph in tandem with his initial resentment quickly becomes too much for him to bear. For someone to give without taking a return is unheard of for Sanji, who, even on the orbit, had earned his place by working as a cook. In his mind, there is no reason anyone should hurt for a worthless boy, but Zeph reveals that they're both dreamers, and that's when Sanji realizes that he's no longer alone. There's a beautiful turn here, where Sanji drops the crap from his dialogue and simply refers to Zeph as old geezer. The biggest tragedy of this moment, though, is that Sanji takes it all wrong. He's so overwhelmed by Zeph's kindness that he promises to become stronger, not to follow their unifying dream, but to offer up his meager life as repayment for Zeph's sacrifice, because the weak, masked boy in him cannot process anything beyond that heartfelt gesture. If you've made it this far, thank you for sharing your time with me, and I hope my nattering was at least halfway entertaining. My next video, if I decide to make it, will cover the events of the Baratie arc. Thank you again, and till next time.